Here we go. We are graphing tangent. If I'm graphing tangent, it looks like that thing right there. That's what we just did on the other side of the paper. That's what tangent would look like. What is the period length of a tangent graph? That is pi. If you look, you go from half a pi this way, half a pi that way, and if you go a half each way, you get a full. So my period length is pi. This is kind of a dumb question, but it's a really important question to graph them. What does it start with? So when I say that, I mean right here at the beginning, on this y-axis, what is happening in the center of this graph? You have one of two options. It is either going to be a point or it's an asymptote line. What happened in the middle of my tangent graph? It's a point. Okay, that's really important to graph these things. You start with a point. You start with the middle. You start with the middle of your graph. That's going to be important. And then the third thing that you need to understand is where does it go from? And when I mean that, we're going to make that S-curve shape. Either that shape or that shape. To do tangent, you got to remember which one you start. If I'm doing tangent, where do I start? Do I start down and go up? Or do I start up and go down? Down to up. I'm starting down here and I go up there. Those are the three things you need to know about tangent graphs. You got to know those things. To go with that, we got to know cotangent. So on cotangent, the first thing we're talking about is period length. How long does it take you to go from one asymptote line all the way to the other one? What is our period length on that thing? It's 1 pi again. 1 pi. You go from there to there, it's 1 pi. We go from 0 to pi. This is important. What do you start with? If I'm graphing cotangent, it's either a point or an asymptote. What starts a cotangent graph? Asymptote. And then when I say go from blank to blank, that means where do you start to make your shape? It is a graph, and it looks like that. So cotangent starts from the top and goes to the bottom. You need to know those three things and how they're different from the other one. You need to memorize it. And so I have come up with stupid memorization techniques to help you with this. I apologize for them in advance. Here's how you memorize them. The period length. This is tangent. If you are going to go to the beach and go tanning, and you're going tanning, you want to eat less pi. If you go to cosine and sine, it's 2 pi. But if you're going tanning, how much is our period length now? 1 pi. You eat less. You want to look good on the beach. Okay? Second thing, what do you start with? Again, if you're going tanning, you're going to the beach, you would look really dumb if you did not tan the middle of your body. If the middle of your body was a different color than the rest, you'd look silly and people would make fun of you. And so when we tan, we start in the middle. Okay, we're going to tan, we're going to have a point right here in the middle of your graph. And the third one, which is probably the worst one, is which direction does it go? Again, you're going tanning, you're going to the beach, you're getting tan. You start off really pale, and then you get more tan as you go. You start light, and you get darker as you go on the beach. 3 dumb things, maybe they'll help you remember the difference between them. Don't get sunburned. I don't got any way to graph red. All right. Here we go. So just like the last ones, we're going to use a checklist. So before we use this checklist over here to the right, that graph says sine, cosine, secant, cosecant. To the left, this is going to help us graph tangent and cotangent. It's a really easy graph, but it sometimes confuses kids because some different things are happening. The good news is we're starting the same way. Amplitude, period length, vertical shift, horizontal shift. The amplitude for all of our tangent graphs are going to be the same. We could change it, but it doesn't look a lot different. It's hard to grade. What is the amplitude on this one? It's 1. We could change it, right? Here's this graph. This is what the amplitude of 1 looks like on this tangent graph. All right, if I made it bigger, it stretches and gets skinnier, but it's just kind of annoying. So we're going to just stick with a 1 amplitude, understand that what would happen is get skinnier, but that's all we're going to do. Amplitude's 1, period length of a tangent graph. What do we always start off with for period length of tangent? Ooh, we're going tanning. Tanning, you're going to eat less pi, 1 pi. Hey, Jesus, do I have a vertical shift here? Which way? Up 1, that thing right there, it's going up 1. Do you have a horizontal shift? Nope, nothing added or subtracted inside of parentheses, so we don't have that. Those are my 3 things, or my 4 things I need. Once I've done that, this seems really basic, but I think it's super important. We are going to make a little scale down here. There are 3 things that you need to graph in order to make a tangent or a cotangent graph. You're going to need an asymptote, you're going to need a center dot, and you're going to need another asymptote. If you're good at math, this is going to seem real simple, but I like it to help me understand it better. This is a scale. If I were to go on this graph that I'm about to make from one asymptote line to the other asymptote line, how far would you go? Your period length. Whatever your period length is, that's how far it is from one to the other. So in this case, it's 1 pi. With that in mind, what if I went from the asymptote to the center? If I only went from the asymptote to the center, how far would I have gone? Half a pi. Again, it seems really simple, but I think it helps here in a second. Okay, we made our scale. I already gave you the graph on this one. We'll show you how to do that in a second, but I gave you the graph. Midline is next. That's my vertical shift. So for this one, I got an up 1, so guess what you do? Go up 1, and you draw a line. That's the middle of my graph. Everything is going to go around that midline right there. Everything's going to revolve around that. I don't have a horizontal shift, so I'm going to skip that. The step 4 is a lot of things going on, but here's what it says. We are graphing and labeling our middle and our asymptotes. Graphing and labeling our middle and asymptotes. And the key to this is this question. What does it start with? All right, that's where I'm going to begin. If I want to graph a tangent graph, I need to know in my brain, what does it start with? Right here on that middle line, it's one of 2 options. It is either the middle point or it's the asymptote. What does a tangent graph start with? We middle. Tan in the middle. You're going to tan the middle of your body. So right here in the middle on this y-axis, I'm going to have a point, and it's going to be on my midline. That's the center of my graph. Okay, I've done this thing right here. I've put the middle point. Besides the middle point, I need 2 other things. I need an asymptote line on each side. So on my graph over there, I'm going to put an asymptote line on each side. You don't have to get fancy. Just draw 2 lines, because we're going to label them here in a second. Those are the 3 things I need. Asymptote, middle point, and asymptote. I know I started at the right spot. Now all I need to do is label them. Obviously, this middle line is 0. What should I label the asymptote on the right? Pi over 2. Kiara, why pi over 2? Good. Full period length is pi. She knows right now she's starting at 0. So if she started at 0 and she goes from the center to an asymptote, it's a half a pi over there. So to get to here, it's a half a pi. With that same thought process in mind, what are you going to name the other asymptote? Negative pi over 2, because you're going 0 to the left. So now we're going to call this negative pi over 2. And we have done all the hard work here. We labeled it, we graphed our middle and our asymptotes, and we started in the right position. The 5th and final thing we're going to do is actually graph it. This is a tangent graph. So when I graph tangent, where do I start? Do I start at the top, or do I start at the bottom for tangent? You start from the bottom. It's tangent. You're going to get more tan as you go. So you start low, and you get more tan. Start down and go up, making that S-curve. Questions on something I did there? No, and so this is the question I always get, which is a good question. On the front side here, it said that we labeled the other 2 dots. Like we put a dot right there and a dot right there. We are getting less specific. We are drawing a real general shape right now. That's what I care about most. Brian, you got a question? Okay. Let's look at number 2. Number 2, negative tangent 1/2 x. Amplitude, period length, vertical shift, horizontal shift. Z, what's my amplitude going to be? It's 1. What else is with that amplitude? It's negative, so it means it's flipped. So it's 1 and it's flipped. I'm going to underline that, make sure I don't forget it here in a second. It's 1 and it's flipped. Next thing we're doing is period length. If I start off with the period length here, what's my base period length, Dylan, on a tangent graph? It's going to be 2 pi. What's our base one of a tangent, though? When you go to the beach, how much pi you want to eat? You just want to eat 1 pi. So he's going to only eat 1 pi, but it's going to change here. He's going to multiply by the reciprocal of whatever's in front of his x. So, Simone, I got a 1/2 there. What am I going to multiply by if it says 1/2? 2 over 1. She's going to multiply by the reciprocal. So he's taking pi times 2 over 1. What's my period length going to be? 2 pi. That's important. We just changed. That's going to affect our scale, affect our graph. What's my vertical shift? None. Horizontal shift? None. Let's make our scale. Make our scale. It's the 3 things we need. We need an asymptote, we need a middle dot, we need an asymptote. How far is it to go from one asymptote all the way across to my other asymptote? 2 pi, because that's my period length. If it's 2 pi all the way across, how far is it going to be to go from one asymptote to the center? 1 pi. All right. Now we can get to our checklist here. Sorry, I was trying to move it off the ground so people could see it. Okay. We did our scale. Now we're going to graph it. So when we make our graph, it's really basic. It's just a normal XY axis. You don't have to put 4 hash marks on it. Draw an X axis and a Y axis and be done with it. Don't make it more complicated than that. So, did my scale, made my graph. Next is vertical shift. Do I have one? Skip it. Do I have a horizontal shift? Nope, so I skip it. Now this is the tough thing. I'm labeling and graphing my middle and my asymptotes, and the key is what do I start with? So I am going to make this tangent graph right here. If I'm making a tangent graph, what do I start with right there in the middle? Do I start with a middle point, or do I start with an asymptote? Look at the top of your graph. Look at the top of your paper again. Tangent graphs start with the middle. We tan in the middle. Okay, so my middle of my graph is going to have my point here. So right here, it's a tangent graph. I start with a point right there at 0. So I've done this part. I need the other 2 things. Well, my dot is in the middle. Where's one asymptote going to go? Yeah, I'm going to to the right of it. Draw a line. If I've got a middle point and an asymptote to the right, where's your other asymptote going to go? To the left. Again, don't make it rocket science. It's the middle for a reason because you got the things on both sides. We graphed it. Now we're going to label it. The middle is obviously at 0. Evelyn, what are you going to label this right asymptote as over here? It's 2 pi to go all the way across. 1 pi to go from the center to an asymptote. So if this is in the center, what should I label that asymptote as? That's 1 pi, because to go from here to there is pi. So Evelyn, what would I call the other asymptote on the other side? Negative pi, because you're going a full pi to the left as well. Good? We labeled everything. We got the middle and the 2 asymptotes. Last thing we're doing is we're graphing. It is a tangent graph. So where would I normally start my tangent graph? We normally start at the bottom and get more tan, but what am I doing on this one? I flip. It's negative, so it doesn't look like that anymore. We're doing the opposite. We're going to start at the top, and we're going to work our way down. There's my graph. amplitude, period length, vertical shift, horizontal shift, and I'm going to make my scale. Tyree, what's my amplitude? No, what's the number in front? Remember, amplitude is the number in front. It's 1. Amplitude is 1. When I do period length, Isaac, what's my base period length? It's pi, because it's cotangent or tangent. We're going to the beach. We're eating less pie. But it's not going to stay like that, because I got to multiply by the reciprocal of whatever's in front of my x. What am I going to multiply by here? A half. He's multiplying by the reciprocal of 2 to give him a half. So what is your period length? Half a pi, pi over 2. Good. Brooklyn, what about vertical shift? Down 1, because that minus 1 here on the end. Do I have a horizontal shift? Nope. Skip it. Okay. Now we made our scale down here, so I drew my line, my dot, and my line. If I'm going from one side all the way to the other, Joe, how far is it going to be from asymptote to asymptote? To go from one side to the other, you're going to the next step. To go from one side to the other, it's half a pi. It's whatever that is. If I were to go from the center to the asymptote, how far would that be? That's pi over 4, because he's cutting pi over 4, or pi over 2 in half. He was even looking up here and helping himself, which is a good idea. He said, hey, if that's a half a pi, he was looking at the one in the middle to know what it cuts into be. It's up on the wall as well. Okay. Made our scale. We made our graph. Now we're graphing our midline. Morgan, what are we going to do to make our midline? Down 1. It's a less down 1. Draw a line. Label it -1. Call it the middle. Horizontal shift. Don't have one, so I can skip it. Then I'm labeling and graphing the middle and the asymptotes. So if I'm graphing my graph here, the key to this is what does it start with? This is a cotangent graph. So when we start with a cotangent graph, what is going to happen here in the middle? Is it a middle point or is it an asymptote line? Asymptote. Cotangents start with an asymptote line. So I've graphed this thing right here. I've got that asymptote line. I've got this. The next thing I'm going to make is a dot. So, cool. I've got my asymptote. As I move to the right, and make sure you're doing that on your midline, I'm going to put a dot. Guess what happens when I move over to the right some more? What should I put next? My other asymptote line. The first asymptote is obviously 0, because we started in the middle. Noah, what would you call your middle point? What would we label that as? No, it's a fourth. Did you say? Is that what you said? I think. Okay, you just said it. Yeah, you didn't say pi over 4. You said a fourth of pi. I was just confused for a second. Good, pi over 4, because to go from the asymptote to the center, it's a fourth of a pi. It's pi over 4. What about my next asymptote? Noah, what would I call that one? To go from one asymptote to the other, we said was a half a pi. So if I started at 0, what should I call the other asymptote? Half a pi, because that's how far it is from one to the other. To go from one asymptote to the other, it's half a pi. So we're going from 0 out, it's a half a pi. Good, we did that, we labeled it. Now we're graphing it. If we're graphing cotangent, that's what we're graphing here. Where do I start to make my cotangent graph? Do I start at the top and go down, or bottom and go up? Top. Cotangent start up here, so I'm going up here, through that point, to the bottom. Questions on 3? I'm not going to give you homework. I'm going to do one more with you, though, and I'm going to go real fast. You got a question, Isaac? You'd flip it. Yep. Here we go. I'm going to go like super fast forward here on 4. Okay, please follow along with me. I know it's going to be a long weekend, but I want you to learn at least a little bit more right now. We're doing those 4 things. If I'm doing amplitude, Angel, what's your amplitude going to be? 1, what's your base period length always? Pi. There is no vertical shift, and your horizontal shift is pi. Which direction is this pi right here taking us? Is it taking us to the left or to the right? Left. It's plus, so we go left. Then we're going to make our scale. Asymptote, dot, asymptote. If I'm going from one side all the way to the other side, how far is that? Pi. That's my period length of pi. So if I went from there over, it's half a pi. Make my graph. There is no midline, so I can skip that one. The next thing is a horizontal shift. It says I'm going left pi. So guess what? I'm going to make a graph, go to the left a little bit, make a line. What should I call that line? Pi, more specifically, negative pi, because I went to the left. Cool. That's my new starting point. That's all it did. It started over there. If I'm starting over there, I did my shift. Now I'm going to do my middle and my asymptote points. What is going to happen at negative pi? This is a cotangent graph. So if I'm going to graph cotangent, is it going to be a middle point at negative pi, or is it going to be an asymptote line there? Asymptote. This is my new start. Cotangents start with an asymptote. So since I shifted my start, I'm going to put an asymptote there. There's this line right here. I've got to put 2 more things. I got to put this middle dot, and I got to put that asymptote. Where would I put that middle dot? Would I put it on this line right here, or would it go before that line? Why before? How far do I need to go to move to the middle? Half a pi. So it's going to be in the middle. If I went a full pi, where is that second asymptote line going to go? On that axis, because it is pi away from it. That's negative pi, that's 0. What would you call that dot in the middle? Pi over 2. More specifically, negative pi over 2. Last thing I'm going to do is graph cotangent. Where do I start to make a cotangent graph? Start at the top.